Alright, so welcome back everybody to the second part of the Bubble Trouble series. Today we will be going to handle player movement, player shooting, and some bubble logic, where the bubbles split. So without further ado, let's just get straight into it. First we will start by separating the player and the bubble to be their own scene. So let's go ahead and make the new scene. Now, first up, we'll make the player scene, which will be a character body 2D as the root, and we just rename that to player. Then in here, we want to make sure we have a collision shape. We also want to add a sprite 2D and a timer, which we will rename to shoot timer, since that will be the time between shooting. As for the sprite, we'll actually just go ahead and temporarily use a color rect instead of an actual texture here. So then for the collision shape, we want to make sure we also have it the same size as the actual color box. So we make it a line. Then what you want to do is come to the shoot timer and make sure the wait time is set to half a second. We'll save this scene as player.scene. And then we want to prepare a bit. So we want to go ahead and add our custom mapping to a shoot button, which we will set to the spacebar. So let's just name the shoot. We'll add it. And then in here, we want to have an action and just hit space. And this way we have it bound to space. So every time we hit space, we will shoot the arrow upwards. Then we can go ahead and create our player script. In here, we will define some variables like the speed of the player and if he can shoot, which we will set to true by default. Then we want to import our shoot timer, so we drag it over, hold Control while we release. Then we want to import the scene of our arrow, which is something we'll make in just a moment here. So we just reference this for now, and we will deal with that later. Then in our ready function, we want to make sure we set up the timer and we connect it to a function in this scene here. So we have the ready function. We want to make sure we connect it. There we go. Then in our physics process function, we want to go ahead and handle the movement of the player. So we first get a direction of the player, which we will do by simply getting the axis of the UI left and UI right. So those will be the arrows. So arrow left and arrow right. If you want to change this, you can do the same as we did with shooting, but just do it differently and then make sure you rename these names right here as you have done it in the input map. Then we want to set the velocity to be the direction times the speed, so we always go towards the right direction here. So now we'll just handle a little bit of logic to flip the sprite based on the direction we're going. Now at the moment I don't have a sprite obviously, so it won't really be visible. But if you were to use something like a sprite, like the actual guy from Bubble Trouble, you would see that the sprite will flip around and move to the other direction if it changes, right? So then we want to apply the movement, which we'll do by move and slide. Then we also want to make sure we clamp it to the actual screen. So to do this, what we want to do is we want to set the viewport here. The size, and then we want to set the position to be a clamp of the position.x 0 and then the viewport x value. Then we want to go ahead and handle input. There we go. So if we press shoot, we want to actually call the shoot function and make sure our arrow scene gets instantiated. So we simply add a event.isPressed, then obviously the shoot, and the player can actually shoot. Then we go ahead and call the shoot function. So next up is the actual shoot function, right? So we instantiate our arrow scene, instantiate. Then we want to set the arrow position to be based on the player. So that will be the global position plus a vector2 with just a little bit of an offset, so that we actually don't place it right on top of the player, but it actually shoots from below a bit. Then we want to make sure we actually add the arrow onto our scene here. And we want to also make sure that we set the can shoot to false, because we don't want the player to be able to spam shoot it. So then we also start the timer, which will start that half a second we set up. And then lastly, what we want to do is we want to implement this function in here. And what this will do is only set the can shoot to be actually true, so that we can shoot again. And this will repeat every single time that everything is called here. I actually do that, so we actually use the right variable name here. So next up is the arrow scene. Now for this, we want to go ahead and create a new scene again. This time the arrow will be a area 2D. We'll rename that to arrow. In here we want a collision shape, and we also want a sprite. We can leave this for now. Yeah, I don't want to worry about that at the moment. So we can go to the root node and we add our arrow script in here. So same as for the player, we want to define a speed, and we want to set the default direction, which will be up. Then in our ready function, we want to go ahead and actually make sure that we detect a collision. So we can do this by adding a body entered signal and linking it to our function that we will make in here, which is on body entered. Then in our physics process function, we want to handle the arrow moving. So in our case, going upwards, and then make sure we delete the arrow if it goes off screen. There we go. And then we want to make sure it goes off screen, or when it goes off screen, we actually delete the arrow. There we go. I typed this wrong. Lol. That should be enough, I think. We can change that around if it's not correct. Then we make sure we actually define this function, and we can also already do something with that. So we want to pass along the body in here. So if the body is in the group of bubbles, is in group bubbles, then we want to actually split the bubble, which will be something separate inside of the bubble screen, but we can just name it like this for now. And then we want to free the queue so that it actually gets rid of it. So that is it for the arrow function right now. Then we can go ahead and make a new scene again, and this time we'll do it for the bubble, which will be a rigid body 2D, because we need to handle some physics in here. So let's name this bubble. Again, a collision shape and a sprite 2D. Then on the bubble node, we want to make the script, and then in here we want to define some variables. So first up is the size, which will be 3 by default, but we will be able to have a couple of sizes actually. So 2 will be for medium and then 1 will be for a small ball. We save the scene, and then we also want to add a split force to know at which it will actually split, and then also one for the bouncing, which will actually set to -300. Then in our ready function, we want to make sure we add the bubble onto the group of bubbles. So we type add to group bubbles, and then we want to make sure we set up the size, which will be a separate function in this file here. Then we want to set up some physics, so the gravity scale will be 0.8. Then the bounce will be 1, which is just a perfect bounce. And the linear damp, which would basically mean that there will be no air resistance. Then let's go ahead and make our setup bubble size function, which will have a scale factor, and this will be used by the size and then a default value of a half. Then the scale will be a factor 2 of the actual scale factor, and the same goes for the other variable here. Then the mass will be basically the size times 2, just to keep it a little bit simple. Then we want to set up a circle shape 2D, which will basically be the size of our bubble, right? So we want to set the radius to be, well, we'll default it to 25 and then times the scale factor. And then we want to set up the collision shape to be the same size as the actual shape of the circle. I typed this wrong. It needs to be shape.radius, not shape_radius. Then we will go ahead and make our split function. Now for this, we will also be using our own game manager. So the game manager will be a singleton, which basically means that we don't have to import it all the time. So we can do that in just a moment, but first let's just go ahead and write the actual script here. And then we can, we can make the game manager later. So if the size is greater than 1, we want to make some smaller balls if it actually pops, right? So we make this function here, the spawn smaller bubbles, and this will be another function inside of this file right here. And then we want to free the queue, and that way we have no unneeded memory usage. So now we can make our spawn smaller bubbles function. In here, we want to make sure that we actually only make it smaller when it's not at its smallest, right? So we start at big, and then we want to make sure we go down to small, so that way we don't use 3 but 2, because we can't split a small ball. So in here, we want to make a new bubble, so we simply load the bubble scene again, and we instantiate it, like so. Then we want to make sure we set the size to be the size it has right now, -1. So that way it lowers the 3 to a 2, for instance. Then we want to set the position to be the position it was at, so just position. We want to set the velocity to be, well, this piece of code right here. It's a bit hard to, which will be the factor 2 of the split force minus of the split force if 1 or if I, sorry, equals 0, otherwise it will be the inverse of that. And then we add the bounce force for the y value. Then we want to make sure we add this ball to the scene again. And that is pretty much it for this bubble scene here. Right, so I noticed bounce doesn't work anymore, and I think it was a recent update that got rid of that. So what we want to do is instead we make a physics material. So physics material will be a new physics material. And we actually set the bounce on to this, which should be here, right? Yes. And we also want to add some physics, or I mean friction. Uh, we actually don't want to add that, sorry, so we just set it to 0. And then we want to make sure we actually override this to be our own physics material. So this way we have implemented the bounce. And then now we can go ahead and make sure we actually add the game manager to our code. So to do this, we want to make a new script. So create new script. We'll call this game manager, like so. We can open this up for now. Then before we actually do the coding, we want to come to project and then project settings. And in here, we want to actually go to auto load. So we can search for auto load, or I mean in globals. In globals, we want to go to the auto load section here. And then in here, we want to make sure we add our game manager and make sure the node name is going to be game manager with capitalized G's and M's. And then click on add. And this way we have set up the global game manager script. So then in this script, we actually want to handle the logic of starting a level, resetting the game, and handling the popping and scores. So let's do that right away. We start by defining some signals, which be a score updated signal, which will go ahead and pass in the new score. So this can be called so that we know the score has been updated, yes or no. Then we also want to add a score variable, which will keep track of the score and the amount of bubbles that are remaining on the scene. Then in our ready function, we want to default it to reset the game, which will be another function we make right here. So score will be 0, bubbles remaining will be 0, and we also want to emit the signal that score is updated with the score, which in this case will be 0, right? So that way we always have a new and fresh instance of our game, and we don't use any previous scores for this. So then we want to handle the onBubble pop in here as well, which will take in the size like we did call it in the bubble script right here. So here we added the size as well. So we need to make sure we do that in the game manager as well. So in here first we'll do the score calculation, which will just be size times 100, and the 100 will be the default value of our score here. We could place this in another separate variable to actually get rid of this magic number, as some would call it in programming, but we'll just leave that for now. Then we want to emit the signal that the score has been updated, and we want to make sure we pass in the new score. Then we also want to update the bubbles remaining to be -1. And then we want to check if the bubbles remaining is less than 0 or equal to 0. We want to emit the game over signal, like we do right there. And that's it for the onBubble pop. So now we want to make a function to start a level, which will be added with a bubble count, so that way we can actually programmatically make a level here. And this will, for now, simply set the bubbles remaining to be equal to the bubble count we have passed. So then for the main logic, which we will have set up in our main scene, we want to come over to our main script and actually add some different functions in here as well. So in our ready script, we want to make sure that we actually connect the signals up that we have made in the game manager, and we actually handle them in this main function right here. So we do that for the on-score updated, and we also do it for game over, like so. Then we want to start the level on level 1, so start level with 1 ball in this case. And then we want to spawn the initial bubbles, which will be another function that we make right here in this function or in this main script. Then we can actually get rid of this process here. We can actually get rid of all of this because I renamed some of it when actually testing this out. So in here we want to make sure we load the bubble, so the bubble scene, and we instantiate it. Yes, I typed it right. Then we want to set the position to be based on the size of our screen. So get viewport rect, and we want to get the size and then the x value divided by 2 and add a y level of 100. So it goes a little bit at the top. You want to set the velocity to just have an initial state. So after we added the linear velocity, we want to make sure we add the bubble onto our scene. And then we actually want to set up these states right here, or these signals. So we make the function for the on-score updated, which takes a new score. Now this is something we will be implementing in the future episode, so the last part, which will be part 3. And same goes for the on game over, which I just noticed I typed wrong above, but that's fine for now. We will just have to rename it. So then we want to make sure we actually get rid of this player and bubble on our main scene. We actually need to rename this to be lowercase because I did that actually. Yeah, I typed it wrong. So that's fine. We need to make sure that's lowercase. So then we can go to our player or our main scene, and we want to make sure that the player. Oh, that's a bit wrong. We want to make sure the player is added to the main scene. So that way we have the initial state of the player added there as well. And then we want to make sure we position this player along the bottom center. Now I'll just do it with the cursor right here. Probably if you want to actually make it good, you would probably change it in the code. So I'll just show you how to do that actually, since that's better. We want to make sure that in our ready function, we actually get the size of our viewport. And then we want to set the player position like so to be a vector2, which will be the viewport rect or viewport size dot x divided by 2, and then the viewport size dot y minus 50. So this way it's bottom center, or at least it should be. Let's take a look. Yes, it is, so that's good. So then we can actually go ahead and so then we can go ahead and actually link up the other parts of this code here. So let's go over to our arrow scene, and we actually want to make sure we add a texture in here as well, which for now will be just this pink color, I guess, which is fine. The collision shape is going to be set up when we actually create it, right? Or was that in another function? Ah, yeah, we did that in the bubble. So then we want to set up the collision shape as well to be a rectangle shape, and we want to align this to be the same as the actual shape of our sprite, like so. And let's actually make the sprite a bit smaller so that it sort of looks like an arrow. In the part 3, we can actually go ahead and implement our own sprites, so that way it actually looks a bit better. But for now, I'll just do it like this. So now we have an actual sort of arrow texture, so that we can see it actually shoot upwards. Then for our bubble, we also want to do the same, because I don't think, yeah, we only add a circle shape. We don't actually set the bubble to anything. So we want to make sure that on the bubble, we also add a color right here. I guess just a gradient for now. So let's just set this to be red, which is fine. I don't know why I'm doing the gradient, but it'll have to do. So there we are. And then the collision shape will actually be handled by our code, I think. Yes, it's handled right here based on the circle shape. So we actually want to make sure that our sprite is a circle. And which I guess we'll just keep a rectangle for now, because we'll use a sprite in part 3. So we actually want to make sure that this will be a rectangle shape instead of a circle. So to make it a rectangle, we want to change this to that. And then we want to make sure we don't change the radius, but we change the size to be factor 2 of 50 by 50 divided by the scale factor. And then we set the shape to that shape right there. Alright, so I think we have everything set up right now. Let's take a look. Yes, as we can see, the bubble did fall from the floor there, but it actually went through the floor. So that's interesting. I forgot to set that up. So in order to add a floor, I guess what we could do is we add a static body. We name it floor. And we want to make a collision shape in here. Whoops. Collision shape. And then we want to make sure that this will be a rectangle. For the player, we want to also set the floor position. Let's see here. So that would be the factor 2. It would basically be the same as the player actually. So the viewport size.x divided by 2, and then the viewport size.y. And we don't add this buffer here so that it's actually on the ground and not a little bit above that. Then we also want to set up the walls. So let's see here. I guess we could set up the walls in the code as well. So for the walls, I guess we could just make them programmatically for now, which is, yeah, that's fine. So we make a static body 2D. Then the shape will be a collision shape. Just showing some options here that we could use, right? So for the floor, we'll just do it right here, and for the walls, it's a little bit better to be in the code. So this will be a rectangle shape 2D. Then we want to set the size to be the same as this right here, so 20, and the viewport size .y. So that way we actually place it on the left here with a little bit of an offset of 20, which is fine. We add this over to the scene. So then we want to add the left wall shape over to the left wall. So we add the shape like so. Then we add the position. So the position will simply be on the left, like I said. Like so. And then we also want to go ahead and set the shape, which I forgot to do, or left wall shape dot shape, which will be the rect. So this way we have added the rectangle onto the shape, and then we add the shape onto the left wall, and then set the position of that left wall, and then we want to add the wall over to the scene. So we can copy this and do the same for the right wall. We can select it and then hit Control D to select every instance of the left wall in this case. And then we can simply rename this to right wall. And then we want to make sure we set this size here, or I mean the position, to be, instead of 0, the Y value, or X value, sorry. And that way we have the right wall set up as well. So now when we run this code, everything should be working properly and it shouldn't go outside of the wall here. Like it, yeah, that works. So let's test out the left wall here. We can see it's losing a bit of momentum, so it's going to take a little longer. Yeah, that wall works as well. And as we can see, because we are using rectangles, the physics are actually working a bit clunky. But yeah, when they're going to be balls, like we will actually be doing in the next part, where we change these textures to be a little bit better instead of just cubes, the physics should be handled better. And if it doesn't work better, we'll have to fix it in part 3. But the basics are here, right? So we can actually move this ball around. We can actually shoot it and it will split into 2 and 3. And then we can actually also see that if it's in its last form, it also gets rid of the actual cube in this case. So yeah, that's working pretty well actually. I don't know why the arrow is the gradient, so I thought we set it to pink. Probably has something to do with this weird stuff going on. Yeah, but yeah, that's fine. I mean, it's something we're gonna change anyway in the next tutorial, right? It doesn't matter, whatever, bro. So yeah, that's pretty much it for part 2. We implemented the shooting, the bubble physics, and the actual splitting up of the bubbles. So in part 3, we will go ahead and implement some finishing touches. We'll use an actual sprite, and we will actually go ahead and make the different sprites for this, or we won't make them, I'll just get some. And then we want to make sure we actually change these bubbles to be circles, so that this weird stuff shouldn't happen. And we will also be handling the score and then the game over state. So that's what I have planned for the final part of this tutorial. So if something's wrong or you can't figure something out, please just let it know in the comments. I would be happy to help like I have always been. And I'll see you in part 3. Bye bye.